many, many records, two of the greatest captains to have graced the cricket field. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Sunil Gavaskar and Steve Waugh. Two of my personal favorites, I'm sure favorites of all of you and billions of people around the world. It's an absolute pleasure to have these two people on stage to talk about India and Australia. Sunny bhai, to start with you, when you sort of played and then subsequently commentated, toured Australia, how did things change? I mean, was it the experience the same when you started as a cricketer and now? Was Australia alien and then sort of became closer with things like the IPL, etc.?
Well, you're talking about a long time ago, because you must remember that my first visit to Australia as a cricketer was not with the Indian team, but I was part of the rest of the world team in 1971. So that itself was a tremendous experience, probably the most enjoyable cricketing tour that I've had. There was a subsequent tour in 1977-78, which again was extremely enjoyable, not just because of the cricket that we played, but because of the team spirit that was there. And so my trips to Australia have been always memorable.
Steve, if you ask the same question of you, when your first tour of India, did the experience change over time? Did the crowd love you more, love you less, give you more banter? How did it all happen?
Definitely. I mean, the first tour I had was the 1986 Thai Test tour, and I played against Sunny and down at Chennai, which is one of the most amazing games I've ever played in. In fact, I think Sunny got 90 on the last day in that famous chase. But for us, it was a totally different experience to play in such oppressive conditions. I mean, it was probably the hottest, most uncomfortable Test match I'd ever played. It was 40 degrees every day, humidity was 95%. So as soon as you walked out in the field, you were just covered in sweat. It was just the heat was stifling. The crowds were like nothing I'd ever seen before. They were very patriotic and very loud and noisy, and you just couldn't hear yourself think or concentrate. So it was such a big change for us. The conditions were very different. It was obviously a turning track, not much grass in the outfield. It was like playing in another place that we'd never even imagined before. So it was very challenging, and for us it was a real learning experience. And to get away in that first testing and have a tie in Madras was one of the great results for Australian cricket. That's one of the probably most forgotten test matches in history. It was a great test match, but it's very rarely talked about. There's not a lot of footage about it, but for us, a huge learning experience. And then I guess 2001 was my last trip here, and it was completely different. I mean, the crowds were still enormous. I remember playing at Eden Gardens. We had 5 days of 90,000 people, which was, I call that the Lords of the Subcontinent, Eden Gardens. It's an amazing place to play when there's a lot of people, and I was lucky enough to get a century there, and I consider that one of the highlights of my career, to get a century there. Magnificent outfield, like carpet, and an amazing crowd who just love their cricket. So yeah, that has changed. I mean, obviously it's a lot easier for modern players to tour India. The hotels are incredible. Facilities are first class. They're recognised almost as stars, celebrities when they come over here. So for Australian cricketers coming into India, it's almost like the pinnacle tour now.
I'll ask you one more question before I come to Sunny bhai again. Actually, there is a 1-hour film on that Thai Test, so you might want to watch that. It's a really good film on that Thai Test.
I would, except I misfielded the ball in the last over, which nearly gave India the win, so maybe I don't want to watch it.
I was going to bring that up, but I thought I'll bring that up a little bit.
It was a bad bounce, mate. I was just about to think I've got a bad bounce.
That actually allowed India to get to the
348 chase.
I played my part in history, yeah.
2001, you mentioned that 100, 250, 247, you get that 100, 445, the Australian total. India won 28 for 8 at the end of day 2. Did you ever think you'd lose?
And do you want me to fill you in on the rest of the game? I'm sure you do. But no, look, we had won 16 test matches in a row, and which obviously meant we'd bowled the opposition out 32 times in a row. We bowled India out cheaply in the first innings, and obviously 33 times in a row we bowled the opposition out. We'd beaten India 4-0 coming from Australia, so we were on a run. got to the second innings, we had Sachin out, we had 3 wickets out, and we're still way in front until that amazing partnership by VVS Laxman and Rahul Dravid, which is still probably the best batting I've ever seen, particularly Laxman. I mean, he just... he was a different player against Australia. He just... I watched him play... You watch him on the TV playing against other countries, you think this guy's a good player. When he played against Australia, he was a phenomenal player. We just couldn't find a way to get him out, and that 281 in Calcutta is one of the great test innings of all time. So I take my hat off to India for winning that test match. We thought we had the game wrapped up after day 2 or day 3, but that's the great thing about test match cricket. You're not sure what's going to happen, and those 2 guys turned that game round, turned the series round. And I have no regrets about this series. I think it's still one of the best test series I've ever played in. Even though we lost, we gave it everything. We hadn't won in India for a long time. But I think we paved the way with our attitude for future sides to play well in India.
So anyway, this whole culture about you getting 100, a batsman getting 100 in Australia is almost like coming of age. England and Australia, you get the recognition from around the world. How difficult is it? I mean, is it about attitude? Is it more about skill, technique? What is it? What takes to get 100 in Australia?
I think it's a combination of all. First and foremost, I think what you need is temperament. I've always believed that temperament is what separates the men from the boys. Technically, you could be very good, you could be the best in the business, but if you don't have the temperament, you'll never be able to go on from what, 20, 30 to get to 100 or a big 100. And quite clearly, I think the conditions are different. The conditions are different from what you play in India, what you've grown up with, and therefore the attacks are different. The speed, the bounce, and often the turn, the deviation of the pitch, vastly different than what you're used to in India. So quite clearly, you get hundreds over there. You feel a sense of satisfaction more than when you get it home.
You know, taking you back to 81, when you lost your cool and whatever happens, I'll ask Steve the same question. Is it sort of tough in terms of sledging? Is it tough in terms of the banter that goes out? Is it the ultimate test for a cricketer playing in Australia? Well,
to be perfectly honest, during the time that I played cricket, there was very little of sledging. In fact, I mean, there was a bit of banter, a bit of questions like, you know, I mean, which side of the bed did you get up from, or what did you have for breakfast, that kind of thing. But there was nothing personal. The only time it sort of got a bit personal was my last trip to Australia in 86. 86, yeah. There was just one instance when it got personal. Then maybe in Sharjah, again against Australia a few months later. But apart from that, there's been hardly any any sledging that I have encountered, or the rest of the team from the Australians. So I think that particular tag that the Australians had at that particular stage, you know, as the ugly Australians, was really not the correct one. It wasn't a deserved one. And just to come back to the fact that, you know, I lost my cool. I lost my cool because I was, it wasn't the decision. Because, you know, that wasn't the first time I was given out LBW when I nicked the ball. It wasn't the last time. But I was going off the field, going off the ground, and it was just the fact that I was given a send-off by the Australians with a few chosen words, which can't be repeated, is the reason I lost my cool. But otherwise, I've really not had any issues with Australians as far as during my time.
I'll ask you this in a bit after I ask Steve. I mean, 1985 is perhaps one of the most less talked about Indian victories, the Benson and Hedges. It was as important, or if not a bigger challenge after 83, the World Cup. I mean, your high point is captain. But Steve, sledging, I mean, did you actually sledge? I mean, did you encourage that culture?
Never.
I mean, nobody will believe that.
Well, what would you like me to say?
How many people believe Steve Waugh never sledged?
One, two people.
See?
No, look, it's the Australian way. Look, your definition is what I guess varies. It's whether you call it banter, mental disintegration, mental interrogation, sledging. Look, it's the way we're brought up in Australia. I had 4 brothers playing in the backyard of Western Suburbs of Sydney. That's the way. It's the way we. I guess it's our nature. It's our culture. It's the way we play sport. It's always a bit of talk. And I always think that Test cricket is a tough game. It tests you mentally, technically, physically, socially and emotionally. So there's lots of different ways that test you out. And, I think sometimes it gets misinterpreted. There are times when people cross the line and it does look ugly for the game, and that's certainly not what you want to see. But I always believe in the Australian cricket side, it was 11 of us talking amongst ourselves, Sometimes we may be making some commentary on the batsman or the opposition player, but in general it's about keeping our spirits up because it's a long day. We try to encourage each other. So I don't think it was exclusive to Australia. There was certainly a lot of talk. I know Harbhajan was quite comfortable saying a few words out in the middle, as was Wasim and Wacker for Pakistan, amongst other people. So,
you know, we keep talking about the chin music and all of that stuff in India when you go to Australia, how difficult it is to play the short ball. Someone like you, perhaps not the natural player of the short ball, but with guts, determination, character, you've overcome that. I mean, so is it about technique? Is it about skill? Or is it more about passion and the intensity and the determination?
Look, at the end of the day, I mean, if anyone saw me playing junior cricket, I was the most extravagant stroke maker ever. I mean, I'd hook and I'd play a million shots and often scored hundreds in schoolboy cricket off 30 or 40 balls. And I played the same way when I first came into first-class cricket. And I all of a sudden had the tag of being the next Doug Walters. And I thought, that's the way I've got to play. So my first couple of years of Test cricket, I didn't really know my own game. I was playing to other people's expectations, getting these magnificent 20s and 30s, but watching other people bat for the rest of the day. All of a sudden I decided, hang on, I actually want to bat out in the middle, so try and work out my way. So it happened at the same time, and Sonny could recognise this fact, that the West Indies had not only 4 great quicks, but they had about 10 or 15 waiting. And I watched our sides play against the West Indies. I played on the tail end of their great 20-year dominance, and I saw a lot of people get hit by the quick bowlers. I saw a lot of people get caught at fine leg. And when I first started playing against Ambrose, Marshall, Bishop, and these guys, I'm thinking, hook shot is not a great, it's not a great percentage shot. That's why I put it away. And all of a sudden, I started scoring runs. And I thought, well, okay, I don't need to play the hook shot to score runs. Batting in the middle order was more about, other things I had to bring into my game. So it wasn't really planned. It just happened. And all of a sudden, I thought, I don't need it. And I became really disciplined. I was scoring runs. I thought, I'll stick to it. But at the end of the day, I could play a hook shot as good as anyone. I just sort of put it away and thought, I probably don't need it.
As captain, what does it take when you sort of lead a team down under? That, what is the kind of self-belief, what is the kind of thought that you have to sort of get into your boys that we can do it despite the conditions being alien?
Well, basically, you've got to believe in your team. I think the most important thing is to believe in the rest of the lads. If the rest of the lads, you know that he can do it, and you try and, speak to him, maybe on a one-on-one before the game starts or before the tour starts or the early days of the tour before you actually start playing the matches, one-on-ones with your teammates, telling him how important he is going to be to the team's success. I think that makes a big difference. I thought, taking somebody like a Sivaram Krishnan out for a meal, Maninder Singh, he wasn't there in that team, but Maninder Singh, Sivaram Krishnan, Chetan Sharma, taking them out for a meal at the start, before they actually went on to play for India. They had just been selected for India, and they were going on a tour, so everything was new to them. They'd never been overseas, perhaps, so explaining, some of the do's and don'ts, explaining what it means to be pulling that India cap on. I think that's part of a captain's job.
Does it happen now?
I'm not too sure. I'm not in the dressing room, so I wouldn't know. But I think that is part of the captain's job, not just to go out in the middle, toss, and then come back and say we are batting, bowling, and then do that. I think the captain's job involves a lot of off-field stuff. And I think the off-field stuff is very important. I think Steve will probably, agree with me. Steve's been instrumental to a great extent in the Australians having a different outlook towards touring the subcontinent, because he's made them realize that, look, you're going to be in the country for about 2 months, 3 months. You've got to go out, meet the people. You've got to try and absorb the culture. You might not embrace the culture, but you've got to absorb the culture, try and understand the culture. And I think that helps you.
I mean, just tell us your experience of playing in the MCG, Sydney, some of these great iconic cricket grounds in the world with 100,000 people, 50,000 people? Oh,
terrific experience, because one thing for sure, the Australians will let you know exactly what they think about your game. And, that again is where your temperament has to score. If you get rattled by what the crowd is saying, then you're never going to be able to bowl well or bat well. But once you've done well in Australia and once they accept you as a good cricketer, I think that is probably the highest kind of praise that you would get, because, they will not praise you unnecessarily. They will not praise you just to be nice to you. And they'll be absolutely blunt and honest. And that's the way the Australians are. That's the way they've been brought up, to be absolutely upfront. And it might look as in-your-face attitude for a lot of people. But I think that's the attitude that can actually get you forward, because you're not afraid of anything. You don't take a backward step. I think their crest actually has these two animals where you don't take a backward step, and I think that is something that once it comes into your system of playing the game, I think it only helps you to get better.
Is that one of the reasons why Tendulkar, for example, is sort of regarded as, one of the best in the world, if not the best? The fact that he got hundreds in 92, 99, 2003 and so forth?
Sonny's right. I think in Australia we appreciate great sports people and fantastic athletes, and we give them a hard time, but it's almost like, once you've graduated and proved yourself in front of Australian crowds, they'll love you forever. And you saw the adulation where Sachin got in Australia. Every time he goes there now, people, they love him as much as the Australian heroes. So if you do well in Australia and you stand up, you do get the respect of Australians. At the same time, they can wear you down as well if you take too much in, particularly the crowds at the Bay 13, at the MCG. That can be hard for Australian crews too. I know a lot of players I've played with hate fielding on the fence down in Melbourne because they give it to the Australian players as well. Depending on the haircut, how you look, how you stand, they'll comment on everything about you. So, Merv Hughes was a great example that he just loved the crowds, and he'd go down and he'd do his exercises. Once you get them inside, they'll do anything for you. But if you go against them, you're going to have a bit of a nightmare. So you've got to learn how to deal with the crowds. I guess it's the same in India too. When we first came here, we didn't know what was going on. We had people whistling and yelling and throwing stuff at us on the boundaries. We thought, what's going on here? But as soon as you have a laugh and interact with the crowd, then they're on your side straight away. So it's how you deal with the situation that can turn it around pretty quickly.
I know what you're talking about. Davey Warner told me last year that after that Joe Root punch incident, he was given a horrible time in Australia fielding at the boundary. Then once he started scoring during the Ashes, everything changed for him. He said, I started enjoying the crowd, and it was a different experience. Yeah. But you just mentioned that if you perform in Australia, the whole thing becomes different. So from that standpoint, when we say Indian captaincy, Sourav Ganguly 2003-4, 2001 series, and Mahendra Singh Dhoni 2011, will I be correct if I say that as a test captain, if I ask an Australian cricketer, former captain, Sourav will be regarded with more respect as a test match captain compared to a Dhoni?
Well, I think that might depend on the series coming up. Look, Australians, as a team, a home team, a couple of years ago the team lost the Ashes in Australia, and it appeared as if we didn't fight in certain situations. We surrendered pretty meekly on the fourth and fifth day, and the Australian crowd hated that, and all of a sudden the team had a very low perception. So in Australia, whatever happens, we respect the fight. So if India come to Australia and they go down on the fifth day fighting as hard as they can, then Australians will love the Indian cricket team. Whereas England last year, in the last couple of tests, just rolled over, and it wasn't even a contest. And the crowd just disrespected England because they didn't fight hard enough. So whatever happens, if India come to Australia this time and lose, or if they win, whatever, as long as they fight as hard as they can for their country, as long as they can, and stay in the game as much as they can, then Australians will embrace them and enjoy the tour. So it's really up to India this time to almost, I guess, prove themselves. They've had a pretty ordinary run in Test cricket over the last couple of tours. I'm not saying because they've lost, but it's the way they've lost. They've gone down pretty quickly and without too much of a fight. So I think that'll be the big test for India and this Australian series. If it doesn't go right, are they willing to fight hard in the second, third and fourth test to get back into the series?
You should hit the headlines, and we all Indians very eager to see Sania should win the match.
All the luck and best wishes to the team of India for the International Premier Tennis League.
I think it's part of the progress of a country that you start thinking more and more about recreation and sport than just about careers and education. All my good